Hello, hi everyone. We are right on time at 2 o'clock. I might give it another sort of 30, 40 seconds, allow a few people to join, and then we'll kick it off with our very full schedule for you all today. Hello, Sarah. Welcome. It's a good opportunity to show everyone the chat icon, the bottom. Well, for me, it's in the bottom right corner. Do use it to introduce yourselves. You'll also be able to ask questions, which hopefully we'll be able to take in real time. Otherwise, we'll take them at the end. Okay, cool. I think let's kick off. We're 1 minute in. So another welcome to everyone who's just joined. Very, very pleased to be here with you all today. We're going to be talking along with Vicky and Eamonn on everything to do with pay transparency. We're going to be talking about compensation and also how important communication of compensation is, together with some more technical aspects. And hopefully it will feel very much like a discussion. And do ask any questions using the chat functionality. And we'll sort of take them at the best time. A few housekeeping bits. Again, please use either the questions functionality, again, bottom right, or the chat little icon, again, on the right, to ask any questions. I'll try my best to pick them up during the discussion. If we can't, we'll pick them up at the end. You do also have the option to raise a hand using the button on screen. Feel free to do this. Again, I'll sort of see if we can sort of interrupt the flow. Hopefully we will, but if not, we'll take the questions at the end. After the webinar, we'll also follow up with the full recording, any transcripts, any notes, any relevant blog posts, as well as the link to register for the next session. So hopefully, as you know, this will be a monthly series, and we'll be focusing on the topic of how to align reward strategy with business goals. Cool. So can move on to the fun bits now. Yeah, delighted to be joined today by Eamonn and Vicky. Eamonn, do you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll take it from there?
Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's session. Eamonn Stanley is my name. I head up total rewards actually at Typeform. I've been with Typeform a little over a year, and obviously pay transparency is something near and dear to my heart, but has been a really important project and initiative for myself and the people team at Typeform. I'm based here in Madrid in Spain, and probably most people can gather from the accent, I'm from Ireland, so I'm seeing all the different locations here in the chat, and so it's great to see the kind of presence we have. Yeah.
Thanks, Eamonn. Yes, it's so exciting to see that our geographical spread amongst the group is so wide. Very excited.
Yeah.
Vicky?
Yeah, hi everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Vicky Peakman, and I'm the founder of Fair Pay Partners. I've worked in HR, reward, comp space for all of my career, and I've focused on pay equity, pay transparency for the last 10 years or so. Fair Pay Partners, we provide tailored solutions to companies to help them with their analysis, their reporting requirements, pay transparency, and how to achieve sustainable fair pay.
Awesome. Lots of meaty advice there, I'm sure, from you, Vicky. Okay, cool. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Vaso. I'm the Chief People Officer here at Ravio. If you don't know Ravio, I'm excited to introduce it to you. Global tech companies and further from other sectors trust us for real-time total rewards, benchmarking, market trends, compensation management, and most recently comp review as well. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about compensation, although I am absolutely certain that the real pros on this channel are Eamonn and Vicky. So looking forward to the discussion. Cool. Go. So to sort of open the subject, why do we think that effective employee comms on compensation matter? It's hopefully obvious to everyone on this call, but the only way to really build employee trust on something that touches 100% of the population and is so important for engagement and retention, I think, is through having a really sensible and effective communication around comp. It also helps managers predominantly handle those really important career progression conversations with sensitivity, with data, and with candor. Of course, it's really important to aim for equitable pay for all our employees. And this is why, in particular, the EU Pay Transparency Directive, which we'll be talking about a little bit later, is also coming into place. So now it's a requirement for the comms on compensation to be compliant and make sense and be out there in the open. So it's important. And yeah, we asked through, we talk to reward leaders all the time. And if we think about what the most common challenges are that they face, and I'll just whiz through this slide because I think they'll be familiar to a lot of us. Having real clarity on the compensation philosophy, how the approach varies depending on employee locations, for example, for global teams, exceptions, that one size never fits all in compensation, and there will always be those folks on the fringes for which exceptions need to be made. But what are the principles behind that? What are the touch points and documentations for reward leaders? Do they make sense? Are they consistent and stable? And then, handling also employee concerns. So, we all receive a lot of questions, and being able to answer those appropriately and fairly and transparently as well. Which brings us on to our first poll. So it would be great if you all participate in this. I'm going to set it off now. So which is the biggest employee comms challenge in your organization? And you can see the options there. Is that working? Has that gone?
Yeah, I can pop up. Yeah.
Great, super. Maybe give it a few seconds there. And then we'll sort of see what's coming in. Great. So, oh God, it's changing quickly. Okay. Super. So we've got 45 votes or so in. So I think a big enough sample size, but absolutely. So top three with a difference: employee education on compensation, the sensitive nature of the topic at 22%, clarity on compensation approach at 20%, and line manager education on comp has caught up. So 4 very clear winners there. Great. So if we move on to what we suspected would come first and happily has. How do we overcome those communication challenges? What does a what does a best-in-class program look like, and how can we get employees to both understand the compensation philosophy and the principles? They may not always, love it, but what is it? What would it look like? Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think is very important is around structure. So starting with the comp philosophy, why does a company make comp decisions the way that it does? And are folks appropriately educated around the comp philosophy? So do they understand the key compensation principles and concepts, and also the tricky areas? If they don't organically understand, or if there's a struggle, are they able to find the documentation in one centralized place and self-serve, self-educate to some extent, and then know where to go in the next as a next stage? I also find that several touch points are really important. So if it's an all-hands session, for example, the centralized documentation, whether that's on Notion, Google Docs, I don't think it matters. The manager upskilling and explanations, lunch and learns, there's a lot of touch points that are opportunities to communicate the employee compensation philosophy. And I think another useful way to think about it is, and I've certainly got these scar wounds, what happens when the structure isn't there? Well, been there, it's horrible. Having a lot of confused employees who feel that compensation doesn't make sense, that it's unfair. There's a lot of change management when we start trying to bring in a new structure. And it's, it becomes a huge distraction across the entire organization. So both for employees who are feeling the pain, managers who are having to handle the noise, the difficult conversations, perhaps with a lack of support from their no doubt overstretched people team, and also just a big distraction for leadership. So yeah, I've certainly felt that pain. Eamonn, do you have any perspective on what a great employee comms structure might look like?
Yeah, and definitely of the kind of pain points and challenges you've identified, I thought would definitely absolutely resonate in my experience too, working through communications. I mean, I think for me, my experience of being that each company's different, right? And each culture's different. And then also what makes it challenging too is the level of understanding of compensation across the organization is different too, and some managers really understand it, some don't, some employees do, some don't. So I think like the first thing is kind of gauging where the organization is at and where your population is at, and then really kind of starting with breaking it down, starting with, as you mentioned, Vaso, like the philosophy, really kind of starting with that, like what is your philosophy, how do you make compensation decisions? And how I've approached it is kind of using that as a building blocks then to expand on. The other piece of this is it's challenging because it's complex too, right? And as you mentioned too, right, there's a lot of each location, each geographic has its nuances. Each job is different. Each program is different. And so I'd say, finding a way to kind of distill that down so that people can intuitively understand this is how it works, is important too, with empathy, right? Like with the people you're working with, and show empathy. And then around consistency, right? Like if you do it once a year, it's not going to work. You have to be ongoing communications, ongoing providing updates, and kind of trying to identify where those key moments in your people's cycle or your people processes where it would make sense to give a rewards or a compensation update. So it's a natural update for people.
Yeah, completely agree. And the other thing that I would add, maybe, Eamonn, and tell me if you disagree, is the importance of an incremental approach. So you don't need to, start with the most complex, it must be well thought through, but it doesn't have to be sort of the end product that a 1,000-person company would have if you're a 200, 300, 400 person company. So sort of start slowly and then build frequently and incrementally. I found that sort of works better and is more manageable for me and my team.
Yeah, and it's about bringing the people on the journey too, right? Yeah, exactly. Like you're building a house and it's block by block. One of the things we actually did last year was, when we do 2 cycles a year, so we do merit and promo and then we do pay and promotion. And so after the Q1 cycle, we made sure to report out on what were the compensation changes, like what were promotions, etc. And then Q3 we did the same. And it's kind of those type of moments are the things which, to your point, like it helps support build that muscle and continue to support the community.
Yeah, great. And how was that, just out of interest, and curiosity, so being nosy, how was the reporting received by the employee group?
Yeah, so honestly, I've been impressed so far, in that the kind of interactions I have and the questions I've gotten to has been more about curiosity and more to learn how does it work. And so I see a lot of that, like where the either leaders or managers or employees, they just want to understand it so that they can do their piece to progress, right? So that's been my experience so far.
Yeah, fantastic. Great to hear.
Yeah.
I also think that as an employee, I certainly, very early on in my career, where I also didn't understand comp and I didn't start in the people space. I think it's a great transferable skill to sort of know how compensation works. The junior employees of today will be managers and leaders of tomorrow. And so if they sort of start early on with a, pretty mature understanding of comp philosophy, principles, best practice, then hopefully we'll have the trickle down effect over the years. And we see that upskilling sort of happen organically as those folks move on to other companies, start their own companies, etc. So fingers crossed for that.
And also too, I mean, the benefit too is when those people become managers, they're able to have more meaningful conversations with their people too, right? So to your point, it's building and building on it. Yeah.
Great. Super. On to our second discussion point. What are the key communications considerations when we're implementing transparent communication on pay practices? Because it's hard and sensitive. Vicky, I think this is something that you've a lot of experience in.
Yes, it is. Yeah, this is hard, and I thought I might just run through a little bit of what the European Pay Transparency Directive is kind of covering, so that we can kind of, because this is it's interesting that there's companies who are wanting to do this, which is absolutely great, but then of course got quite a lot of people on the call, and a lot of those are in places that are going to sort of have to start bringing this in. And what's quite interesting about it is, from the US, pay transparency has kind of become quite a big thing, but really that's just job pay on job postings, really, and salary history bands. That's the kind of two main things that is coming out of the US, which are all great and actually are being transferred around the world. We've got that in the UK quite a lot, even though actually it's not required. The European Pay Transparency Directive is actually requiring that, or at least before you get to interview stage, and it's obviously also saying no salary history band. They're not allowing clauses in contracts to stop people discussing their pay, that sort of thing. But it's going loads further There's a right to information for employees on how the pay is determined, what the pay levels are, how pay progresses within bands, and up above bands. There's also, and this is the big one, a right to information on individual pay and the average levels broken down by sex for their job group. So basically, their pay and the pay gap for their group, and that group needs to be a group of jobs that are equal value. So it's not just my job title, it's like the grouping of all the jobs that are similar to mine, basically. So that's a really big thing for companies to have to kind of work out, because it's not just about how do we communicate comp philosophy, but how do we actually communicate some of those intricate pay numbers that we do in the background, but we don't necessarily communicate out to our employees. And then, so all of this is for every company in the whole of the EU, which is quite interesting. On top of that, companies that are larger from employee size, depending on where you are, the numbers are different. It could be 250, could be 100. There are then reporting requirements on pay gap numbers and pay gap numbers for each of the groups. And then if the groups are bigger than 5% and it's not justifiable, then there's further things that have to be done. So that's quite meaty as well for companies. But that's might be the more reporting kind of requirements. And this isn't just base pay. This is also, variable pay, benefits. So it's, it's the full compensation.
Total reward.
Basically. Total reward, yeah. But for the purpose of this conversation, I think the things we have to focus on is employees need to know how they're in their job that they're in, what group that's in, basically, and how that's grouped, how pay is determined, and what in my pay, and then how is that against sort of my peers, to make sure I'm being fairly paid against my peers, basically. And so that's like a really big change for a lot of companies. And you were talking about kind of incrementally, and I feel like we've got time. This doesn't come in until June 2026. And so, we have time to do this kind of thing incrementally as well. Like, start with talking about your comp philosophy. It's better not to wait until you can, hand them a sort of, massive document of like, read through all this. You want to sort of start with like, the basics, particularly if you don't communicate that sort of thing at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And even though June 26 feels quite far away, and it is, it kind of feels like we should start doing the work now, so that, we sort of build up to that big sort of file of documentation we're going to have to provide. So
right. Yeah. I mean, you can't, it's really hard if you just come in and someone, from June, not entirely sure on the dates, but like at the point when your employee is able to say to you, can you give me the pay gap for my group, basically? Right. At that point, you've got to be able to do the numbers and all that's in the background. But if you haven't built up how all the information around that, then they're not going to be able to understand that. Like, that's, you've got to be able to be in a situation where you can put the context around those numbers. And so you have to so it's all the other stuff that has to be done in the background. It's not just about getting the company ready for kind of, and a lot of companies I'm working with, they talk about like the reporting requirements. Obviously, they're panicking about that, and like, how do we do the numbers and how? But actually, it's about getting your employees ready as well for the change, because they're going to it's a cultural change, right? If you're not talking about your pay internally, and it's not, and suddenly everyone knows things, like, it's a big change. So it's about getting the whole company ready.
Yeah. So we know that we will put in the work, and we will get there. But what we need to sort of build the muscle of is the maturity within the employee group, so that we don't sort of overwhelm them with all this information. Vicky, we had a question, and I know that we're going to have to keep the answer short as possible. I know it's a big question, but Paula would like to know, how do we determine the jobs? Equal job, equal value. And I know,
that's a whole webinar.
Yeah,
that is. So I mean, there are kind of rules around kind of it has to be equal in terms of skills, working conditions, effort, and responsibility. Basically, it's those sort of things. It's basically the things in your sort of job description, almost like the kind of level of the job within the organization and kind of the requirements for the job. Generally, if you've got some kind of job classification, you've got some kind of leveling across organizations, some kind of job families, then you can probably kind of do that in terms of grouping. So if you've only got job titles at the moment, then there's probably a bit more work to do in trying to kind of determine that. But you can also use, if you're benchmarking your jobs, you're kind of already doing that because you're putting them into groups that then go, well, you're putting them into your benchmark, you're matching them into a company, and often they're then into groups. So you can use like Ravio or anyone else to have, to think about which jobs are kind of grouped together in that. So there's lots of different ways to do it. But it's better to start now in terms of trying to work that out if you've not got the sort of leveling. It's all about leveling across organizations, I think, rather than just within career paths.
Okay, thanks Vicky.
That's quite a quick way of
a very meaty topic that Vicky and I have discussed in length. We also have another question. How do you think about transparently sharing your percentage pay percentile in your comp philosophy versus not, which may give you more opportunity to change the percentage in line with pressures in the external market?
I can take that one.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really great question. I think in my approach would be, from a philosophy perspective, would be that we want to be competitive, and obviously we want to benchmark, and we want to have programs which attract, reward, retain talent, motivate talent at your organization. So in regards to that, just given how the market changes, how you have new jobs coming on the market, you have old jobs and shifts there, I tend to keep it at the next level down. So if your philosophy is your overall, but then it's the next level down would be your guidelines or your rules, how you actually benchmark jobs. I do think it's very important that you are consistent in how you do that. And then if you're changing it, like you're making a conscious decision on why you're changing it, so that you are being like kind of consistent in your decision making and consistent in your approach and holding true. So that would be my perspective on that I think the philosophy should be more bigger picture, and then that would be a double click into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks for that, Eamonn. And I think, well, sort of tying it all well together, am I right in thinking that you recently rolled out transparent salary bands at Typeform?
Yes, we did. Yes. So we actually, in January of this year, we actually rolled out all our salary ranges for all locations for all levels up until senior director.
Wow.
So we published those on a company portal, basically. So it means employees actually can go in and actually check the salary ranges for their job family. And then I actually went one step further. Then we gave employees a little like Google Sheet widget where they can put in their own compensation and put in the salary ranges and calculate where are they within the salary range. So we rolled that out actually in January of this year.
Okay, sounds like a really big project, but also a fun one.
Yeah.
What was it that, what was the driver? Why did it, why now, had boiling behind the scenes?
Yeah, no, there was probably 5 or 6 reasons why we did it. One was around just our people strategy and alignment with transparency. We want to be very transparent from a compensation perspective. Mm-hmm. The second thing was we had heard from our employees that they actually wanted more transparency and they wanted to know this. So it was employee feedback.
That's great.
Thirdly, then, we wanted managers just to have better conversations with their employees about compensation and performance and how that works. And then fourthly, like there's so many studies on pay transparency that it really motivates, like if it's done well, performance and productivity. So, you know, kind of that piece of it too as a motivator for our workforce.
Mm-hmm. Super. And how, well, to what extent would you advise all companies to have at least, you know, for example, let's talk about transparent salary bands. To what extent would you advise all companies that, you know, yay, great, it's, you know, it'll be positive. And if not, like when, you know, is it something that is sort of a timing thing? Is it a culture thing? What would you advise folks like us?
No, I mean, like, I mean, the first thing is the decision around what level of transparency and how transparent you want to be, right? The second thing is then really kind of understand what's the reason why you would do this for your organization. The third thing is then like anticipating potential issues like are people below your minimums? Like what is the position of your workforce? I think for me, like the outcome was really great because the support I got was incredible. Like the people team was all behind this initiative. The leadership was behind the initiative. So we were all working together to achieve the goal. So I think that for me was a differentiating factor versus how it could have gone, right?
Yeah. Okay, we've got loads of questions in the chat, which is great. So Eamonn, I hope you're ready for
yes.
here.
Yeah.
So I've sort of rejigged the order, so bear with me. But so a question from Jessica. Eamonn, how can you talk a little bit about how you prepared leaders ahead of the rollout so that they were prepared for questions from their employees?
Yeah. So really great question. I would say like, and it's how Vaso, you and Vicky have been talking about it too, and how we've been talking about it is, it's like, it's not the final destination. It's like bringing people on the journey. So it was building blocks, like starting with our philosophy and what are our rewards at Typeform and how do they work? So helping people understand how they work, how they benchmark. And then from there, you know, our Q1 cycle, then reporting out to the workforce on outcomes from that. Q3 report now. I will say last year I did two, on top of the 2 quarterly cycles of us working with managers and leaders. I also did 2 enablement sessions for managers. So by the time then we got ready to actually roll it out to our workforce, managers had heard it twice. And then the other thing which I think was a differentiator was the content we shared with managers, we shared with employees. So, you know, like there's, like, I don't want to use the word there's no excuses, but everybody has the same information then, which really, I think really helps. Yeah,
completely agree. And just, you know, a small win for the people team. It also means that you don't have sort of, you know, employee comms, manager comms, leader comms, and it's all sort of wrapped up.
It is, and actually, if I can just touch on that point, Vaso, like a win for the people team, but it went as far as to say that the people team was aligned with this, so our HRBPs were leaning in and supporting leaders too, and then we have a small shared services team, and then when questions came through that, they were equipped to answer questions.
Fantastic.
So it was like a people-driven initiative. Yeah. Really. So
sounds like a great team. And to what extent, so question from Ekaterina. Hi, Ekaterina, nice to see you here. So Eamonn, did you have to to what extent did you have to fix any comp issues in advance of sort of going, you know, pretty transparent? So for example, were there many instances where, for example, you had to lift someone off from like the minimum or below what became the minimum of the band, etc.?
Yeah. So that is actually part of our philosophy, in that we have nobody below minimum. So as part of like our quarterly reviews, we always make sure everybody's above that.
Yeah.
I think the intent of this exercise wasn't to fix. So we went into it saying, like, we're not going to fix or adjust anybody, but what we are going to do is get ahead of like potential issues or potential questions. And so that's where if people were low if their comp ratio was low or there was something else, I would have flagged it with the manager.
Yeah.
And so between HRBP manager, myself, the manager was equipped to answer those questions and address any concerns. So I think that was also an important point, like that we didn't, outside of what any other comp person would do around, the equitability and kind of equitability of the employee base, like we didn't go and do anything else. We didn't do this big fix or anything like that to be ready. We just
Great. I think just to add on there, I mean, great to hear that you didn't have to make any sort of very that all was in order basically when starting the project, which is super. But for anyone who's on the call who is inheriting a mess, or a company that's grown very quickly and there's loads of inconsistencies, my advice, having been there and sort of made this colossal mistake personally, the earlier you start fixing these inconsistencies, so people who are wildly it's less painful if they're sort of on the positive end of the band, but people who are wildly below whatever your comp philosophy will be or is, the earlier you start fixing those problems, the better it will be for you, for them, for everyone, and it sort of just feels better as well. And then I think a question from Scott. What have been the lessons learned so far, Eamonn, from launching the pay bands in January? And congrats, it sounds like a fantastic initiative.
Thanks very much, Scott. I think just some of the lessons have been now that we've done this, we need to keep going with it. And so we need to kind of keep the communications going, and we need to kind of keep that going. I think it's kind of like for other kind of comp people I've spoken to, like the question's always like, do you fix your architecture, or do you roll out your salary ranges, or which do you do first? And so I think now what this does is it gives us then an opportunity to really kind of hone in on our job architectures and our career paths and all that, and really kind of elevate that now. So I would say for me, just one of the biggest learnings was just around the importance of that collaboration and making sure that the full people team is equipped to be able to answer questions, and making sure that it's not just on you, it's a people initiative. I would say is probably the biggest thing. And then the second thing is around we have a Notion page, so it has so much content, FAQs, all that, so employees can go there, refer back to it. So having a database of content that people can refer to easily, I think that's the other key piece.
Super. Okay, we have loads of questions. I think we're going to move on and then hopefully get to them at the end. But great to see. Thanks everyone for the questions. Just to circle back on, to what extent we should be going transparent and what works for different companies, maybe different geographies, different cultures. Vicky, I know that you have an opinion on the sort of, super fully transparent, everybody's salary is out in the open. Yeah, it would be great if you could tell us about it.
Yeah, so I feel sometimes when you look at like the pay transparency kind of spectrum, people think, well, you go from like, we don't talk about it, which is, to everyone knows everything about everything. Like it's all on the web, basically. It's all on your website, who is paid what. And I kind of like to think that I don't think that's the end of full transparency. I think the sort of end of full transparency is that I, as an employee, can basically work out why my salary is what it is. Like I can look at comp philosophy, I can understand everything. I know what factors are involved, and I know how I can calculate my salary. I can also calculate what my salary will be if I move to another job in the company. So because I know the ranges above, I know what the rules are around. And if I knew everything about someone else, I could potentially calculate their salary too, right? But that doesn't mean, so that's kind of like, as far as I'm concerned, like that's kind of true transparency from an organizational point of view on how comp is done. Whether or not that then requires you to kind of put that amount on a website, like I think is like, I feel that it works for some companies really well because they want to be those organizations that have that, and that's great for them. But I don't want every company to think that if they don't get there, they're not at full transparency.
Yeah.
It's like an additional step that's kind of, I suppose, not necessary to reach full transparency. That's my thought on it.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, so it's a spectrum, and it sort of needs to work for every company.
Right, and to get to that point of being able to, you have to have the pay in place. You have to have all the information out there. You have to have structures that people stick to and rules that people stick to. You have to, so to get to that bit of that I'm talking about as full transparency is actually really hard. And I don't want companies to think that the fact that they haven't published them means that they're not doing something that's actually really quite hard to get to, because as Eamonn was saying, actually for them it sounds like there's a lot of work in advance of that to get their comp working well before they then became transparent about it. And so it is a huge journey to go on.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Okay, and I think our next poll is on exactly that. So the question that we're asking is, what level of pay transparency is your organization planning to implement for employees? And I think I've published that now. And then, so I've submitted my vote. But maybe I'll sort of tell a little bit of an anecdotal story. In a previous workplace, when we were debating this question, in the end, the founder CEO was very clear. Actually, he had clarity and sort of said, people should be able to understand and explain why they are paid what they are paid, but I believe that people's salaries is a personal matter, and it's not appropriate for other people to know exactly what I earn, what my COO earns, what my people person earns, etc. And I've always remembered that because I sort of hadn't thought about that, but there are many folks who sort of feel that it's a very private matter, and others who are totally fine with it being in the public eye. A bit cool. Okay, so the results sort of show that, okay, clear winner of partial transparency, i.e. giving employees access to their own salary bands, meeting the requirements of legislation only, coming in at, so partial transparency was 48%, compliant comes in at 30%, and then full transparency, employees access to all salary bands, 23%. Interestingly, 0% on open salaries. There you go.
So I just convinced everyone.
Yes,
need to.
Absolutely. Super. So now we're going to cover a few sort of scenarios. But just before we do that, how can we? And we've sort of covered a few bits. how can one prepare line managers for those challenging comp review conversations? Now, I think relevant to this conversation is the data context that we're seeing this year, past year and this year. And all this data is taken from Ravio. But you can see, so within Europe, the salary increases are down significantly, and they're not expected to rise in 2025. So this makes what is normally under good circumstances a difficult and challenging conversation even harder. So to put a little bit of color around sort of the line manager comms, we're going to talk about a few scenarios, and then hopefully we'll be able to get to the questions as well. So scenario number one, a manager needs to communicate poor performance feedback and therefore no or a low compensation adjustment. Eamonn, can you help with this one?
Yeah. I mean, no increase. So, I mean, what I'd say is like, well, one manager should prepare for that conversation, start with empathy with the employee, provide clarity, really kind of provide that feedback around what is the poor performance, how can that person improve. And then what I would say is then tie it back to talking about what your compensation philosophy is or what your approach to compensation is, and then explain why, okay, that's why you don't get the increase. And then really kind of just wrap it up by kind of focusing really on the development and goals for improvement for this person and how they can be in a position to get an increase the next time. So I think that's having those conversations about it so they can better understand how comp decisions are made and how their performance impacts it, is I think the right approach.
I think so too. And then also, sort of feels obvious, but hopefully the employee who isn't performing, is not finding out that they haven't been performing for the past 6 months in that conversation, because that makes a painful conversation way, way, way more painful. So the importance of sort of frequent feedback and course correction, at regular intervals, I think is really important. And also clarity on expectations is usually really important here. So, let's get the foundations right, but also, make sure that the comp philosophy relating to performance is clear. Scenario number two, the manager needs to communicate that an employee has performed highly, but they're already at the top of their salary band. Vicky, what do you think?
So this is quite interesting because it kind of depends on the philosophy and the practice that the company set up. If there are strict rules around not going above the band, then that's obviously going to be slightly harder conversation than if those rules don't apply. Usually there's sort of provisions as well. So even if they can't go above the band, then they might get a bonus or something. Obviously that, the salary doesn't increase, which means that, it doesn't impact things like pension or whatever comes off it. But it is so this sort of discussion has got to focus around what the rules are around being at the top of the band, and what that means for them, and trying to be clear enough about the fact that because they're a high performer, then you want to make sure that they come out the positive thought about their pay, even if it means that they're having a slightly different thing than they maybe thought they were if they weren't going to be at the top of the band. But I do think that if you are at the top of the band and you are a high performer, then that really the conversation should be around them being potentially ready for a promotion or some kind of different project or something that is about that. So actually the conversation can revolve more around how they're developing their career and how they're doing at the company. And so making sure that positive reinforcement is there. And so there's a bit of kind of technical explanation of the sort of financial side of it, but actually, this should be really a kind of good conversation, because they are obviously an employee that is performing really well at the company.
Absolutely. And this might be a case where that needs to be documented within there will always be exceptions principle.
Right.
So if it is going to be a bonus, a sort of a backward facing bonus for performance, then that can be highlighted in the exceptions section.
Right.
But also if there's other levers, for example, an equity top up, or I've seen holiday days being used. I feel a bit weird about that, but a holiday day bonus, that might be something that's used. But it could fall in the exceptions
right.
section.
Yeah, it's working out how a total rewards point of view. They're
exactly.
not losing out.
Exactly.
Because but as you say, it might be an exception because they're a high performer. It might be that someone who's not a high performer doesn't get that, and so as long as you've got your principles around the exceptions, then you can kind of lean on those.
On this thing, it's important to understand the person's motive too, right? Because it could be something like career growth opportunities or specific initiative or project that they get to work on, which could be a motivator too. So
right.
I think there's to your point, Vaso, like other comp levers, but maybe there's other intrinsic levers too that you can use to kind of keep that person motivated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then scenario 3, an employee was expecting a higher salary increase or bonus, equity refresh, whatever it might be, than they have received, and is really, really disappointed. And we've sort of covered it, but Eamonn, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it happens, right? I think it's always important in this case to kind of acknowledge the person's concern or the person's question, really as much as you can, then provide context for the decision. Assuming this is a high performer, really kind of reinforce the value they're bringing and their performance and how it fits in with the overall comp philosophy. And then I think really kind of talking about future growth potential and earning potential, and kind of shifting the conversation a little bit to, okay, there's disappointment here, but how can they get there? And is that even a realistic ask? And then what does it require? Like maybe it requires a shift in role or a change around. So I think those would be the thing in exploring more why. Yeah.
And I would also add that, it has happened, but very rarely do you get, does one get, oh my God, I couldn't be happier.
Exactly.
Response. So, we want to be realistic and fair, but we can never sort of please. We certainly can't please everyone. But.
No.
Okay, and then our last scenario, and I think this one's for Vicky, but an employee questions the fairness of the compensation decision. For example, why am I getting a lower increase than the person who sits next to me? Or how come that person's getting a promotion? They don't do anything, whereas I'm working really hard and, have done really well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a tricky one. And I think like the other ones, actually the preparation is the most important thing here. If you have got all that documentation about how comp is calculated, how things work, and sort of to make sure that it's fair across the board, then it's less likely you're going to have some of this, but it's also easier to explain because you're able to say, look, this is the kind of how it works. But I think it's also really important to listen to the person and take their concerns seriously, because there's a chance that something is happening that particularly if you don't know for sure that what they're saying isn't true. That so I think there's not so much you can say, but if you should be doing investigations in the background just to make sure that there isn't something to this, and obviously if there is, you need to fix it. But it's important to ensure that the conversation is about the employee concern rather than the other people. And so you can't be like, well, that person, you really have to be focused on why that person's paid as they are, and to try to help them understand like that. and how they can progress their own pay so that they feel like they're being paid fairly. So it's about how can they be paid, feel that way, so that you're leaving them feeling like heard, and so that they understand it's within their own power to influence their own pay, and so they can get there. So a little bit like, the last one, it's about kind of, how what are your expectations and how they're realistic and how do we get there, so that person maybe can feel a bit more empowered in their own. But it's sometimes you think you've got a really good policy, but sometimes the application of it doesn't quite work, and so sometimes we analyze the policy, like the rules, but we don't necessarily analyze how it's impacting people, and so sometimes there can be bias creeping into decisions, and so it is important to listen as well to make sure that those aren't happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really important that we as people teams or people consultants, but we keep ourselves accountable. So there might be something that we've missed, right, and we should be able to deal with that either out of cycle or, as we become aware of it. But absolutely, like in that conversation, we're talking about you and your performance and the year that's just gone, not, my friend Mary. Super. I think so. We've got about 4 minutes for questions, and I think there are some fast ones that we can get through. So Fanny is asking, I think, Eamonn, can employees see only their own range or also other pay ranges, salary bands? I think, the range of the band.
Yeah, they can see. So they can see all jobs, all job families, all levels up to senior director. And then they can see from mean, midpoint, and max. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so that's
really good.
Yeah. I will say we did talk about restricting it to just people and the jobs they're in, but then we thought it was just going to be so complicated to restrict it, and we debated it and we said, it's better just we share it with everybody, and then everybody has the same information.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and related, and it was sort of one of our scenarios as well. Paul is asking, what actions should we take for team members whose salaries exceed the maximum of the range? And Eamonn, is there, I don't know, some intel you can give us here?
Yeah, I mean, we're going through a cycle now, and I will say, like, it really comes back to the particular person, the role they're doing. Is it critical for the organization, their performance? And then, that's the first thing I'd look at. And is there a valid reason why they're there, or is it just because historically they were getting these increases and that? Then the second thing I would be saying is, what is the longer term plan for this person, right? How are you going to incentivize them and motivate them going forward? And then, I would be thinking about, are they up for promotion in the next year? Does it correct itself? Like, how does this play out over the next year to 2 years?
Yeah.
It doesn't, like, if you have a really high performer that's adding significant value to the business, right, and they're above the range, I don't think there's any objections with that typically,
Yeah.
It's just when you don't have that scenario, it's
Absolutely. I think we have time for one more question. So Edward is asking, does pay transparency mean that employers will no longer be able to set salaries based on market rate for specific roles? For example, would HR and finance jobs at the same level need to be paid equally, even if market benchmarks differ? Vicky?
In 1 minute. I mean, I think in the end, kind of yes, although I would say that the market values will probably start aligning a little bit more as companies start putting them into groups. I think pay by job is going to be less likely, but pay by range, you can take the market values of all the different jobs within there and create a range around it, which means you're kind of then internally working out how to pay them fairly. So it's not equally, though you are allowed differences and variance in pay, you're just not allowed huge pay gaps. So like there is a difference in that, which is the gap between men and women, not the gap between people. And so I think it's important to kind of look at that. You can have difference in pay, but within the range, you can't be paying, men very differently from women. So, but I do think there's going to be more kind of simplicity within markets, and maybe there'll be people who are just benchmarking to a job group rather than benchmarking to jobs.
Mm-hmm. Super.
Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense to me, Vicky. We've talked about this subject a lot.
Yeah.
I think that's all we have time for today. Eamonn and Vicky, thank you so much. I've actually had so much fun. Not that I'm surprised, but I really enjoyed the session, and hopefully the crowd also did. We will be following up with everything sort of with the recording and questions, and happy to follow up on any questions we didn't get time for as well. So we will be getting answers to you. All right, that's all for today. Great to see you all, and thanks again, Vicky and Eamonn.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Abby.
Cheers. Bye.